Hello and a very good afternoon and welcome to Petplan viewers on this Facebook Live. It's 3 o'clock on the 25th of November and guess who I've got here? I've got my big Max. He is wearing his festive collar, trying to lick my chin. So I have my friendly and excellent helper Neve behind the camera, and we have a nice list of questions for you today to look at your dog behaviour questions of all ages. Just to add on, this is the last Facebook Live of the year, so we hope to be coming to you again in 2019 with a fresh batch of dates that we can keep you up to date with in the near future. If you would also please be kind enough to like and share. As you watch this live, there should be a little share icon on your screen. If you can press that, that helps spread the internet juice all round. So I'm not sure how long Max will stay here. I have little Pip, the Border Terrier, as well, but she's asleep and half deaf, so even if I did call her, I don't think she'd be coming in a hurry. I will get Max off. Come on, off. Good boy. Go and lie down. Go and lie down. Right, that's Max sorted. I hope you enjoyed seeing him. So Neve, what's the first question?
Okay, first question is from Sharon, who asks, please can you help? I have 4 rescue doggies, which I love dearly, but Coffee, who I've had for nearly 2 years, just won't stop barking. He barks at everything, and I mean absolutely everything. He just doesn't stop. We've tried everything with him, but still he barks. What can I do? Thank you.
Okay, well thank you for the question. That is stressful when you have a dog of any breed and any age barking constantly. And I think that's a key word, stress, because when a dog barks constantly, it builds and builds and builds stress. So a lot of people will say to me, well, dogs bark, it's what they do. Well, yes, they do, but dogs can do anything to excess, and then we have a problem that stresses out the owner and in actual fact the dog itself. This is the sort of thing that I could easily spend 3 or 4 hours breaking down, and we could find that you may end up with 3 or 4 main threads of behaviour that we might like to address over that period of time. But of course, here we are with lots of questions in a relatively short time, so I'll do my best to give you some ideas. I would also preface this with, it does sound as though you might need some professional help, but having said that, see how you feel with what I offer you today, and then you can make an assessment based after that. So you will, I think, benefit from sitting down and looking at, or maybe making a list of the different things that make your dog bark, and then it will allow you to unravel the subject and for things to be a bit easier for you to manage. This will be a good way for you to grasp more clearly what's going on. Traditionally, we would use or think about a blend of both management, on one hand, management techniques on one hand, and then on the other hand, distraction using positive methods. Many dogs are food driven, thankfully, and when a dog is food driven, we can distract the dog away from an unwanted behaviour and to get that dog into something which is calmer and more relaxed. So let's say, for example, the dogs are all quietly in the house and then somebody knocks on the door. You then have this eruption, potentially. I'm imagining that all 4 dogs would bark at the same time, and so this is where the problem is bigger than just one dog, although I accept one dog may be worse than the others. But I could imagine that, you know, the more dogs you have, the harder it is to manage, so we have to sort of accept that to a degree. But certainly with this particular dog, in the home, I would have a lead on it when you're present. When you go out, when you leave the home, or at night times, take the lead off the dog, so it should only be used with supervision. Because that is a nice and simple way of managing the dog. You can keep the dog at your feet more at specific times during the day, and prevent the dog, say, from rushing to the door, sticking with this example, and getting into some sort of hyper zone about how, you know, stressed the dog is getting. So the lead is a good way of managing the dog in a variety of situations. If, let's say, the dog was food motivated, I would have her on you some little dried out bits of chicken, something that's been cooked out quite well so it's not too wet because it lasts a bit longer, in a bowl or a mug, and that you can then distract the dog onto you, not for the dog to worry so much about the other thing that's making your dog bark. Okay, so I can hear that this may sound a little bit unsatisfactory, especially when the dog is barking at everything, but the basic premise that you could apply, or the technique that you could apply to these situations, is that you find your dog's Achilles heel, whether that's some type of high value food, so a bit of experimentation may be required, or just say quickly, you might find something like a little squeaky ball that you could keep on your pocket, that you could squeak that and to gain your dog's attention onto you, and as soon as your dog's looking at you, you could reward that with some food, again if you can find a bit of a balance between a squeaky toy and then food. So, and then again, we need to apply it to all the areas that your dog is barking at, because then we can hopefully see a general reduction of the stress. And then once you get into that reduction, that's a positive reduction cycle, because your dog will be more relaxed and less likely to be barking at everything else. Okay, so this is why I said at the beginning, you may also benefit from working with a behaviour specialist or a trainer that's used to looking at behaviours like this, because you've got 4 dogs, your dog is barking at everything, and you may need a little more in-depth help. So I hope that gives you some ideas. Stay tuned, because having spoken to Neve this afternoon, I believe we've got a few questions that relate to barking, and so there could be a bit of a common thread on today's Q&A, which is great because we can go into a bit more detail, and you may also glean other little ideas, tips and tricks that would be useful for you. So thanks again for your question. What's next, Neve?
Okay, Kaylee asks, why does my 7-year-old Staffy dog pee in her own bed at night time? She has 2 beds, one in the living room, one downstairs in the kitchen where she sleeps at night, but I'm constantly replacing it as she does always wee in it. Thank you. Okay, I'd
be interested, thank you for that question. It's not normal for a dog of 7 to be peeing in her bed at night. There might be some mileage in you speaking to your vet about the problem, because urinary incontinence in slightly older dogs, and 7 is slightly older. I have always had in my mind that a dog of 5-8 years of age actually falls into the senior category. So 7 years of age, if your dog has been spayed, you might be looking along a veterinary route. If it isn't that, and if because, sorry to interrupt myself and coming back, when dogs urinate in their beds at night, of that age, it's quite likely to be an involuntary thing. So even if you find that your dog is getting up from her bed in the day, and that there's a little patch of urine on her bed, and I would look for that, by the way, I would sort of be more vigilant in the day as well as at night, then you may find that that could be a good clue for some urinary incontinence, which your vet could discuss with you. Alternatively, you may have some anxiety in the dog, which is leading to her to urinate in her bed at night. Again, most dogs would not wee in their beds overnight because it's their sleeping space, unless, of course, and this is the sort of thing I would ask you if we were together, unless she could potentially pee in her bed and then go and sleep elsewhere. If that bed was in a crate and then she couldn't, and she was enclosed in the crate at night with the door shut, and incidentally, if you were to do that, you need to make sure she is has been previously introduced to the crate and she's comfortable to go in there at night, then that could also be a help to you. So the possible introduction to a crate at night would be worth thinking about. But if you've never used a crate with her before, then that's another sort of hurdle for you to cross as well. So I think in summary, you have a bit of detection work to do. See if she is getting up from her bedding in the day, and if there's any wet patches. Sometimes it's not very evident. So lift the bedding up, check the base of the bed, and to see if that's wet, because that's usually where you'll find some evidence there. And also look at how what sort of access she has in the night. I mean, if, for example, she's barking or showing stressful behaviour, let's say you know she has some separation anxiety, then that may be a behavioural reason. So there's more sort of question marks maybe than answers, but at least we could try and chase down those 2 or 3 possibilities, and then once you've come up with some sort of idea and as to why this is happening, then of course we can figure out how to address it. You're very welcome to contact me via email, nickjones@alphadogbehaviour.co.uk, and I can give you some further help if you have made some investigations and then think, well, we think it's this, and I could give you some further tips that way. Or you could update me on the Petplan Facebook page and I will pick it up there as well. Okay, thanks for your question.
Okay. Karen asks, my Romanian rescue dog, who's 11 months old, still keeps jumping up to say hello to everybody. She's due to be spayed very shortly. She would like to know, will this calm her down, as she's a little worried it might change her adorable personality?
Okay, so thank you for the question, Karen. Most of the time, people's concerns about the change in character of the dog as a result of neutering is not something that we should worry about. Having said that, all dogs should be looked at on an individual basis. There's no particular reason why you shouldn't neuter your dog based on what you've told me today. And so as a result, let's focus on methods and techniques on how to stop her from jumping up. In theory, if we teach a dog always to sit before we engage with the dog, then you have a dog that is sitting or has learned to sit with, as they say, all 4 feet on the floor, and that is what brings in the indulgence or the attention giving from the human to the dog. And so it stands to reason that if you can teach your dog day in, day out, every time your dog approaches you, if you ask him to sit, once the dog is sitting, then the hands can come down. That is a good way of doing it. And it can just sort of eradicate longer term out of the dog's repertoire. 2 big words on a Sunday there, so I best go steady. But it can get rid of the jumping up as a result. Now, it's not quite as simple as that. That's something you can do yourselves as a family in the home. When you have people coming to visit the house, then of course if your dog is loose, she'll be whizzing around and excitable and jumping up, and you'll be getting frustrated. Well, you can quite readily deal with that by just simply clipping a lead on your dog. You can then have control of your dog, and should she jump up, well, you can use the lead to bring your dog off the other person, and then you can also put your dog into the sit position. When you use the lead, it's not a yank or a rip or anything harsh, but it does stop you from physically allowing your dog to put its front feet up on the legs of another person. So this is my workstation in the office, and often I'm sat here writing reports and what have you, and Big Max, who you saw at the beginning, he has been taught from the very beginning that if he wants to be touched, he has to be sitting. So he sort of comes in here, he parks his head in the corner behind me, and then he sits down, he looks at me and says, well, I'm sitting, you can touch me now, can't you? But that's nice, it's what we've taught him to do because it's good manners. As you can see, he's far too big to be jumping up. I'm tempted to bring him in and demonstrate, but I won't. I think you've already seen him, and we'll crack on with questions. So, to summarise, with visitors to the house, a lead on to interrupt any jumping. You can then guide your dog into the sit position, and once he's sitting, you can say to your guest, now you can touch him. Okay, so that's dealing with guests to the home. You could also, that also applies in public, by the way, whether you're in the high street or in the park. And for yourselves in the home, you must strongly discourage any jumping up and always ask for the sit, and once the dog sits, then your hands can come in. Okay, so good luck. I hope that helps. Thank you for the question, Karen.
Okay, following on from the first question about barking,
Yes.
Katie has asked, my dog barks and growls at every dog she sees when we take her on a walk. How can we stop this behaviour?
Okay, good. So another good question. And when a dog is stressed or anxious, they will become vocal, or can become vocal, and barking and growling and whining and screaming. Some little dogs make screaming noises, which is distressing to hear and to be a part of. This is all sort of the dog's individual vocalization, and it's obviously expressing some stress again there. So, as with the first question, we would really be looking at managing the behaviour on one hand. So we need to make sure that we've got a good secure lead attached to a harness or a collar, maybe a body or a head harness, whatever you're using at the moment, and that equipment needs to be secure. So we've got the management there, but then when we're imagining, or rather when I imagine this behaviour to occur when your dog is on the lead, it's not really appropriate for your dog to go over to the other dog, especially if it's on the other side of the road, and to say, oh, he has to say hello, and let your dog drag you across there to do that. If you knew the person, it might be appropriate. But in most instances, when we have a dog on a lead in public, we really want our dog to be able, if we request it, to sit down, to allow the other person and dog to pass without any fuss, and that the dog is either looking at you or looking on at the other dog and person and not doing what you're describing. So how do we do that? I have to say, as people that listen to my approach on a regular basis will know that I'm a great fan of using distraction techniques, and we can practice that day in, day out over a period of weeks and months, and this, through a really diligent and consistent approach, can help greatly reduce the behaviour you're describing, because we are replacing it with something much more calm, much more self-controlled. So when you see another dog coming, I call this the 1, 2, 3 method. Step 1 is you see another dog coming towards you, and this will apply to a lot of you, I'm sure, because I use this 1, 2, 3 method all of the time, and it's so simple and it's so effective. Step 1, we see another dog coming. If it's the same side of the road and you think it really is narrow and your dog can't cope, you can cross over. Or maybe you could, depending on the environment, you could give yourself a few extra feet on somebody's drive, and you can just sit your dog there very briefly, okay? Step 2 is when the dog is passing you in that immediate vicinity. So they're coming in from this angle, they may be 10, 15 feet away, or the opposite side of the road. This is at the hottest spot here because the dog is dead opposite you, and this is when your dog is most likely to be at its worst in its behaviour. And then step 3, this other dog is transitioning into step 3, which is where the dog is so far away that your dog is not worried any longer, or maybe has gone out of sight around the corner, and of course the same would apply. During step 2, that's when really from step 1 into step 2, that's when you want to be feeding your dog high value food, or potentially, recently I had a lady with a collie do a lovely job where she actually just used a squeaky tennis ball, and her dog was much more into that than the use of food, and that's through her own experimentation. So food, toys, even just you engaging a bit with your dog to keep its attention is a very valid and effective way of addressing that sort of behaviour. So it's very simple, but the 1, 2, 3 method is very effective. If anybody, as we come to the end of the year, if anybody would like a copy of my 1, 2, 3 method, please feel free to drop me a line. I think the most effective way is to email me, nickjones@alphadogbehaviour.co.uk, and I will happily send that to you, because it can actually address quite a large range of behaviours. It doesn't have to be a dog that your dog is barking at. It could be a person, it could be a bicycle, a bus, a horse, sheep, anything. And so the 1, 2, 3 method has a nice approach with that. So A little bit long-winded, but I hope that gives you some good food for thought there. Thank you.
Okay, Carol asks, my dog won't let anyone in the house that he doesn't know whenever they're coming to see me, and she added a little bit more information later which says he was treated quite badly when she first got him at 4 months old. He's now 9.
Okay, thank you, Carol. You can teach an older dog new tricks, despite what they say. The difficulty with visitors to the home, in my experience, because I go to people's homes on a near daily basis looking at behaviour problems with people, is that it's fair to say not many people have that many people come to the home. So you don't get a great amount of opportunities to practice. And with any behaviour, to make it better, we need to practice it and to do it on a regular basis so that we can reduce the dog's anxiety. Look, a dog I think that's 9 years of age, and also it depends on the breed, and it depends maybe on how big the dog is and how severe this behaviour is. It may depend on how long your visitor is staying for. You could, although I don't really recommend it, there isn't really anything wrong with putting your dog away for a short spell. So that is always an option, and I wouldn't wring your hands too much if you have to resort to that. But on the basis that you've asked the question, you'd like to improve it. So how do we do that? At least you certainly need control of your dog. So again, you'll be putting a lead on your dog. There's another little useful technique. You'll need to introduce it prior to people coming around. So do it about half a dozen times. But you could, depending on the size of the dog, let's imagine for a moment it's a small dog. You would be able to have a lead on the dog, and then to attach that lead onto, say, the foot of your sofa, something that the dog can't move. Okay, and then you provide your dog with a little stuffed rubber device with some nice soft food in it, lots of recipes on Google if you care to have a look, and that you get your dog into the habit of realising that it is restrained, albeit on a line, so the dog can move around, it can stand up, lie down, sit down, but the dog can't charge across the room and aggress to anybody. Let's say that might be happening. So we eliminate that option, and once you have that in place, then you could begin to bring people into the home. You could ask your guest to ignore your dog, and then you coincide the entry of that person to the home with giving your dog the stuffed toy, and the line is attached to the sofa so your dog can't get to the person. And then your dog, best case scenario, would take about 20 minutes to work on this device, and then your dog will have gone from highly excitable to close to normal behaviour in terms of excitement. You can then approach your dog with a separate lead, clip that lead onto your dog, unclip the lead which is attached to the sofa, and then you could consider approaching the person if you thought that was appropriate, and the person could then feed your dog. So I'm trying to keep this simple, but hopefully you can see some nice simple steps involved there. A lot of people suffer with their dog's excessive reactions to the doorbell, and that's something which would be a component of what you're describing, okay? Because even before somebody has come into your room, the doorbell has gone or the door has been knocked, and your dog is already up to a scale 8, 9 or 10, and then that person comes in and the dog's having a meltdown. So spending a bit of time desensitizing your dog's reaction to the doorbell or the knocker, whatever you use, is extremely helpful. You can, without a proper caller at the door or a real person, you can put your dog on the lead, have a pot of treats, maybe in your pocket in a jacket, and that you can have the door open and press the doorbell, and your dog will know it will not see anybody. There's a very good chance your dog will bark because of the conditioned response your dog has. If you can just wait for the barking to subside, get your dog to sit and then feed him. Press the doorbell again, and then once the barking has stopped, maybe implement and tell the dog to sit and to be quiet. Once the dog is able to do that, good boy, we can reward it. So what you'll find is that the dog's reaction to the doorbell over successive efforts and over ongoing days and weeks will become really relaxed, and you'll find that the dog's reactions to the doorbell will be a great deal calmer. Okay, so there's some little threads there for you that if you begin to bring them together could make life for you a lot better. Probably the final and important point is to practice, is to get people over. Maybe draw up a little list of people that you know and trust that could come to the house, and that you could have some experiments with them. But rather than your dog being able to completely flood this person with whatever behaviour they're showing, you've got calm control and you've done some practice beforehand. So I hope that makes sense. A nice little recipe there for you to try. Okay, thank you. What's next, Neve?
Okay, Marissa has a bit of an issue. She says, why does my dog wake me up throughout the night? They have done this. They have done this for the past 7 years. I let them all out at night, and they go to the toilet before bed, which is around 10 p.m. Every day for 7 years, I have to get up at 5 a.m. I've told them to go back to bed, and I feel this is now becoming worse than a newborn baby.
Oh boy. Well, I can draw some assumptions from that. The biggest one is that the dogs are or do have access into your bedroom at night. And I think when that happens, I'm not particularly against it, but in terms of best practice, I don't recommend it. I often think about, well, how do I deal with things in my home with my dogs? My dogs from day one sleep in the utility room downstairs, and they are allowed upstairs, but only when they're older. And then our own bedroom doors are closed at night, and dogs don't have access into those rooms at night. The trouble is for you now is that you have older dogs with many years of practice and experience of coming into the room, and so it's not as simple as me saying to you, well, just shut your bedroom door and don't allow the dogs in, because in strict theory that would work, but you're then going to have dogs scratching at the door and being vocal in the night. Some people can actually, having just said that, some people can shut their doors and say, that's it. I have had some behaviour visits where I've just said to people, no longer is your dog allowed in the room, it sleeps downstairs, and any noise that the dog makes, we're just going to grin and bear it, and that the dog actually works through that little phase. That can work sometimes. You might like to try it, because if it does work, it's a very quick and easy route to a good night's sleep for you, which is important. You see, because your dogs can sleep in the day, they can mess you around in the night, and then you have to get up and go to work whilst they're sleeping. It's not fair, is it? So you can take the sort of hard and fast route and see how it works. Alternatively, you could do something like putting a baby gate up at your bedroom door. You keep your bedroom door open, but there's a baby gate there. Make sure it's high enough so that they can't clear it. You can get some baby gates. I have stood against some that come whilst I'm stood up to my chest. So that is something you could look at. Once you're in the room, your bedroom, don't engage with the dogs. Just ignore them, give them ample beds and bedding, and that would be your first stage. And then you might do that for a couple of weeks, so they sleep on the landing if that works for you. And then after a couple of weeks, well, that could either be a solution for you, or that you could then say, well, we're now going to bring the dogs to sleep downstairs, and that we bring the baby gate to the bottom of the stairs, and that the dogs don't have access upstairs at all. It's a difficult one because I'm so conscious of many little things that could come up. So whilst in theory it's good for me to say, well, don't let them in your bedroom, I'm a realist, and I know that if we just try to implement that, you're going to get quite a few problems because your dogs won't agree with you. So try the baby gate at your bedroom door. You might also like to think about taking back control of how much access they have to you in the day. So, for example, I'm okay with dogs coming up on sofas. You saw at the beginning, Max came up on my seat here, which he's never done before from memory. Just thought it would be funny. But he only comes up here or on my sofa when I ask it. Okay, and equally we need to know that there's no grumbling or complaints from a dog once it's up there, and then when you ask your dog to get off, they should get off immediately as well. So you might like to think about how much access, and if they're smothering you when you're on the sofa, if that's happening, I would try to push that boundary back as well, because this is an emotional thing that's then being reinforced at night, and the two sort of go hand in hand. So make sure any affection and attention you're giving your dogs is really on your terms, not so much the dog's, because that would also be a subject that I would drill down on if we were having a conversation together. So affection is good, it's why we have dogs, but try to keep the balance in your favour, so it's happening, as I say, on your terms, not the dog's demanding it of you. So good luck with that. I would be very interested to have some feedback as to how that goes. Okay, thanks again for the question. How are we doing for time, Neve?
Yeah, we're doing well.
Good.
We have had a cat question.
Ah, yes.
That's kind of similar. Gemma and Jane, one has a 7-month-old and the other one has a year-old cat, but they have the same problem where they keep pooing on the carpet, but in certain places. Even though they've both been allowed out, and Gemma's particularly has 3 litter trays throughout the house. Yeah. And they were just wondering if this behaviour shows anything in particular.
Yeah, but those are separate people separate questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a common way of addressing inappropriate toileting in the home is to double up or triple up on litter trays, so that the cats have plenty of locations and opportunities. You might, again, I can't ask you these questions, so I'll just talk generally. You may find that some of these open litter trays that are a little bit like what you might call a bit public, you know, it's not very private, the cats may not like to use so much. So have a think about the type of litter tray you're using. I like ones that even might have something like a flap on the front, and that it's completely enclosed. The cat can go in, do its business, and then come out, and it feels completely secure in there. So that's something for you to think about. The positioning of the litter trays, I mean, if the cats are relieving themselves in a certain location in the home or a certain room in the home, then maybe you could increase your litter tray count in that room in particular. I think cats, like dogs, can benefit from being managed. If we give a cat or a dog carte blanche to go anywhere or to roam anywhere in the home, then we can sometimes get problems. So our cat, we have a single cat here, Doris, and she is not allowed in the bedrooms in the day. The doors are closed and she just has access into the kitchen, the lounge and a bit of the landing. And she's perfectly content, and she does have a cat flap and she can let herself out to toilet there. So it is okay to think about what access your cat has in and around the house. Naturally, the lounge is a central part of the home, and so that may cause an issue for you trying to keep her out. I would also be interested as to what time of day your cat is doing that behaviour, and also whether your cats were housebound, or you know, whether you let them out or not. Some people do keep cats in, and this can, you know, have slight complications as well. If I mean, there may have been some recent changes in the home. Cats are quite susceptible to becoming stressed, and that may account for some inappropriate toileting as well. I do think that cats respond really quite well to the cat version of a pheromone collar, so that might be something that you can look into as well, because this can have a calming effect upon your cat. And or you might like to look into some sort of herbal calming remedies. I always prefer a natural approach where possible. So that might be something that you look into, and to see if that would help. If there's any cats coming into the house which are not yours, then that's something I highly recommend you address. We have a couple of little gadgets which are particularly good. Our cat flap works on the, I think the correct term is the RFID. It's actually the chip on the cat's neck, the microchip, and when that chip is read by the cat flap, then the flap opens. The beauty of this is that you can register, I can't recall exactly, but something like 100 cats per, God help you if you've got 100 cats, but up to something like 100 cats per device. And that would mean that only your cat would be able to come in and go. So if your cat is microchipped, which I do recommend, especially if it's going out, then that sort of device would be really useful. And just as a quick word, as a quick aside, we also use the same sort of technology as the cat feeder. So when the cat approaches the cat feeder, there's a little bar up over the dish, and this reads her chip, and then there's like this little plastic tray that slides back and she can have access to her food, you know. But it stops my border terrier going in there and eating more than she should do, or any cat food. So I hope that helps. Again, any sort of dog or cat questions are, I have the initial question, then I have to sort of make a few guesses, but I hope that gives you some ideas, and thanks for the question.
Okay, Julie asks, my 7-month puppy got really scared by the fireworks the other week. Now she won't go in the garden once it's dark, and any noise scares her. She runs and hides upstairs under my bed shaking. What can I do to help her?
Yes, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. We have, of course, just pretty much finished the fireworks season. It's a bit quieter here where I live, so we're not too affected by it. But those of you that live in more built-up environments and you have neighbours just letting them off randomly without telling you or anything of that nature, it can be extremely distressing for the dogs and the owners. I was pleased to see today, coincidentally, a very large petition being presented to the government, which is asking them yet again to reconsider the laws around the use and sale of fireworks. So I hope in the future that we can see some more stringent controls. In the meantime, I think when a dog has had a severe fright, you will need to give the dog just some weeks and months to settle down again. And the chances are that your dog will return to a calm way of being. Getting the dog out at night is something that you could gradually introduce again, maybe for a control, so the dog doesn't sort of run away or hide under the hedge or anything unwanted of that nature. I would be inclined to put a lead on your dog. If your dog would take high value food from you once in the garden at night, then that would also be helpful. So wait for your dog to do his business, and then once he's gone, give him a really nice little treat to reward that behaviour. You might want to wait a little until you think your dog is more settled generally, but then you could, on the basis that you know your dog doesn't respond well to fireworks, and not many dogs do, to be fair, but my favourite approach is that you get hold of a CD with some high quality recordings of professional displays, and the idea is that you play this over a number of weeks and months, probably ideally more weeks than months, to be fair, and that you start at an extremely low volume level to begin with, and you play it just so you know that your dog's aware of that soundtrack, and you'll see it by the dog's ears pricking and looking around and potentially looking a little concerned. Just back it off a bit there, make a note of the number at which you're playing it at. And you need to make sure, by the way, that you play it on a decent system. If you play it on a little cheap CD player with a couple of speakers, it will not sound any good and it won't replicate the sounds adequately. You might want to use something like your DVD player connected to television, or a proper home stereo, so that you have some real genuine replication of those sounds. When you play that CD, you want to combine it with something nice and positive to distract the dog. So it depends a bit on what interests your dog. For many, I would use a hollow rubber toy where you can stuff it with some soft food, and that you can give that for the duration that you play the CD. okay? And I would do that just once a day. You'll need to be present, of course. You'll need to manage the dog. Supervise is a better word, and to ensure that the dog is coping and actually working on that device. If your dog is fed dried food, there are some devices that twist apart. You can fill it with dried food and the dog pushes the device around and the food drops out gradually, so that might be a way forward, okay? We can't make a dog eat when that device is, when the CD is playing. So most will, in my experience, but if not at all, don't worry about it. Just let the dog sort of relax, and you can do it without food altogether, but if you can use food, we can sort of fast track it a bit more. So the idea is that over every few days you turn the volume up a little bit and you judge the dog's reactions until you a few weeks down the line get to the point where you know your dog can manage with these sounds, and you should then find that you are proofing the dog ahead of time. Okay, there are a host of other things you can do as well, but that is the main one, okay, that I like to do, because we are physically getting the dog used to those sounds, and if you can cope with those sounds without any calming remedies, or you can get various body wraps and things like that that can help reassure the dog, but if you can get the dog used to those sounds, that makes a huge difference. So I hope that helps. Good luck. Let your dog settle down. It will take a little while. That is quite normal. Okay, but thank you for the question.
Okay, Sam has asked, I have a nearly 2-year-old Welsh collie. She's constantly licking us. She will happily sit and lick our hands or legs all day. She has done it since she was a puppy. I've never known a dog lick quite as much as she does. I was just wondering why she does it and if there's a way we can stop her.
Wow. So, you know, dogs, again, it's like barking. Dogs bark, dogs lick, and they do these things. But when that sort of behaviour goes to the point of excess, as you are describing, then really we have a bit of a problem, don't we? Because it's interfering with the dog's relaxation and abilities to be to be relaxed and peaceful. And of course, you're being licked all the time, which isn't much fun either. Personally, when I have young dogs and they might show signs of licking, I say to the dogs at that very beginning stage, no licking. I almost treat it as like a nibbling or biting thing. So it might be no biting or no licking, and I stop engaging with the dog at that point. So this is clearly a behaviour which had its roots in younger months or in the early months, and that it's continued at some point. I mean, I certainly would introduce a key phrase such as no licking. You might already be using that, but of course if you are, it's not working. So if you're not using it, consider introducing it, and then you will need to push your dog away without being, I'm not saying shoving your dog away, but don't be frightened to push your dog away and to say no licking, and then maybe to walk away so you're not engaging with the dog. Some of these sorts of issues can often be relatively easily addressed if you are just that bit more clear with the dog. No licking, that tone of voice, that sort of action, and then maybe get up and walk away. Your dog is most likely doing it because it finds that it may be a very submissive dog. It's trying to appease you or please you. And as I say, you could find that the dog is a bit anxious in its makeup. But that is the prime method. You could also use a trick one of my colleagues sort of gave me as an idea many years ago, is that if, let's say, your dog was prone to licking your hands in particular, or say your forearms, then you could spray them with some anti-chew spray, and that will make your hands and arms taste quite unpleasant. Remember to wash it off later on, but this is a method that if you, as a family, depending on how many of you are there, that if you sprayed your hands and forearms in particular, because that I imagine would be the prime area. It's unlikely to be licking clothing. It may be, but it's more unlikely, and I wouldn't allow any licking of the face at all, and that's more down to how you're sort of managing the dog there and what you're allowing. So use the command no licking, push the dog away, not roughly, but make the dog understand that you're not wishing for it to do this to you. And also think about some anti-chew spray. Another little idea for you is that you develop and become confident with a send to bed command. Because if you were able to say to your dog, no licking, on your bed, lie down and stay, then that would be a nice way of dealing with it. You'll need to be sensible about how long you expect your dog to stay there for, but in itself that would be a nice little method. So you could, just to give you this idea very quickly, a little pot of treats. If your dog doesn't know this already, you could point to the bed from a short distance and say, on your bed. Once he's sitting there, you can lean in and treat, okay? Do that a few times from quite close distances, and then the essence of this idea is that you start moving away from the bed, or greater distances away from the bed, and pointing, and then waiting for your dog to jump into the bed. Once it's there, you may end up sort of tossing the treats over to the dog, and then you can build up little times or durations with the dog in the bed. All right, so that could give you some more control in the home, because I just have this image of him constantly on you, constantly licking, especially if it's as bad as you sound, as you describe. And I think that bit of extra control would help you. All right, so thanks again for that question. That's a very interesting one, not a common situation to be faced with, but still something that can be addressed.
Okay, Lisa and Nina have a similar problem with their dogs. Lisa's problem is, my Chihuahua always pees on the edge of sofas and the baby's toys. Is this because it's become territorial, and is there any way of stopping him? And Nina asks, why does my dog wee on his toys and anything else he finds to play with? How can I stop him doing this?
Okay, well, immediately I've got a few questions, but I can't get answers to them because of the time constraints. Dogs that are more along the lines of marking in the home are much more likely to be male. If, let's say, for example, that we found that to be a male dog of around an adolescent age, 12 months, 18 months, then I would suggest that that dog could be a good candidate for castration. But I'm always a bit wary of making such sweeping comments, because every dog is a individual and unique, and before you do that, you should discuss it with your vet, and ideally with somebody in my profession that looks at behaviour and they're used to being able to make some sort of determination as to whether that measure would be appropriate. Because whilst I'm not saying it's a cure-all, in the vast majority of cases you would expect to see a reduction in that sort of behaviour by about 70+% as a result of castration. So let's park that subject, but I would encourage you to look into it, because that could be a very big section, or it could address it in a major way for you. Going on from that, when dogs are anxious, they will tend to mark things as well. Okay, so if there's anxiety in the dog, that could be a reason for it. So a few questions for you. Is the dog being exercised enough? Is the dog being given regular toilet breaks, and that you're satisfied that the dog isn't urinating, he's actually marking? And it's because the two are different, and it sounds to me as though both of these dogs are marking. And if that's the case, there's a much bigger likelihood that this is males doing that behaviour, and again, there's a good chance that they're both uncastrated. There are some products on the market that allow you to really remove the sense of urine or dog urine on various products. So if a dog is marking on a particular corner, I think you said like a sofa or something, Neve, yes, that you would need to clean that area well with that particular product. I can't really give product names here, but do have a good Google around and see if you can come up with something that would address that for you, or again, you can contact me directly and I can give you some directions in that respect. And then it's also about management. What areas does your dog have access to? Is the dog being adequately supervised? So there's a few questions there, and hopefully those questions will provoke you into some sort of flow chart in how you could ultimately address the problem and come up with a solution. Okay, it is difficult with babies and dogs and then toys and getting the dog to understand that which is which. I personally, it's 20 years ago now for me, but when we had a dog and a baby, we would keep their toys separate, and actually we would always put them away in separate locations. So the baby's toys would always go back into a big basket at the end of the day, and any toys that the dog had would also then go into a little corner for them as well, and that would help differentiate the dogs and the baby's toys. But supervision on this one also is a big thing. You will need to supervise your dog's behaviour. Easier said than done when you've got a baby and a dog, just referring to that particular element. But I hope those ideas from me to you help you move forward. Okay, thank you again. Thank you. Neve.
Hey, Jennifer asks, how do I calm my dog down when people come to visit? I'm having to keep him out the room when my elderly grandparents come round. Then he starts playing up when he's not allowed in.
Right, good. So in a way, this is a very similar scenario to the lady that couldn't allow people to come into the home, or the dog wouldn't allow people to come into the home, to be more accurate. So the key points there, if I can remember correctly, was to practice some desensitization at the doorbell. Have your dog on a lead, pot of high value treats, maybe on a ledge nearby. Press the doorbell, wait for quiet, reward. Press the doorbell, wait for quiet, or try telling the dog to be quiet, because that can be useful. Once the dog is calm and quiet, reward. So we can reduce the dog's reactivity to either the knocker, the doorbell, or people just knocking the door frames around. So that's very useful. There's a lot of mileage in doing that, so I do recommend it. I did say it's not the end of the world to put a dog away, but of course we don't have dogs so that we exclude them. We want to include them, and so this is why you asked the question, I realise. So as a basic measure, you need to have a lead on your dog as people enter the home. Depending on the size of your dog and the behaviour and the severity of this behaviour, you can try my fixing point method, which I described earlier in a bit more detail. So very often good heavy furniture allows us to restrain the dog lightly on a length of line that keeps the dog towards that furniture but prevents the dog from charging or jumping over people. Once the dog is on that fixing point, we can then distract him or her and to use some sort of food device that will keep your dog busy as people enter initially. Okay, once the dog is calm enough, and by the way, ask your guests as they come in to ignore the dog. You need them to be cooperating with you as well. So it won't be helpful if you're doing your best to control the dog and they're coming in trying to fuss him or her up. So once the dog is calm, maybe 15-20 minutes on your fixing point, then you can go over, unclip the lead from the fixing point, place a fresh lead on the dog, and then walk up to your guests and to have an attempt to say hello. The dog must be sitting to say hello, and you don't be frightened or embarrassed to manage the dog, to let them see that you're managing the dog, and your guests will have a lot more confidence in you. There's many situations and homes I go to where people don't have callers or family or friends come to the house because they know the dogs are basically out of control, and that's not fun for anybody. It's not fun for the people coming over, it's not fun for you as a owner, and actually I don't think it's much fun for the dog either, because it's a stress-based behaviour. The dog doesn't really understand it to be that way, but it's something we can do to help control and to calm your dog down more. So again, that's a bit of a mirroring of the earlier question, and I think it would apply well to you there. It's still a good question because this is very, very common. You know, a dog's reactions when visitors come to the home. many people, I would say the majority of people with dogs, would have some sort of difficulty in dealing with that sort of behaviour. So thank you for that question. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, Neve. Is that right? So what do we have?
Just going back to your first point about barking.
Yes.
Julie has said, how do I stop my dog from barking at every animal on TV? And she's added as a side note, he especially hates the Dyson advert with the collie.
The collie on the Dyson advert. They should have chosen I don't know, some different breed for your dog. Actually, this comes up a few times each year, and it is doable. Now, with what we want to do, okay, so I'm just collecting my thoughts. Really, with many behaviour problems, we end up being reactive. We want to be proactive. So how do we become proactive when addressing this sort of behaviour problem? Okay, well, the idea is that many people have the ability to record TV nowadays. So this is the best way to do it. So record a program that you know would press your dog's buttons, and also make sure you have a recording of that particular advert, okay? And then once you've got it queued up on your player, you put a lead on your dog, you get yourself a good handful of very high value food. It might be something you do in the morning before feeding your dog breakfast, or you maybe skip breakfast and do this exercise mid-morning, so there's a bit of hunger in your dog, because that can help. And that you basically get your dog to sit at your feet, you play a short clip of the video, and then you pause it. Now, it depends on, I mean, I have seen some dogs react quite violently towards the TV, and I then have just seen some dogs sort of run up at the foot of the TV and bark up at it. But by the way, that running up to the TV, or maybe putting its paws on the cabinet or anything of that nature, that all needs to be ruled out. That is not allowed in our little repertoire of what we want the dog to be doing. So the way to stop that is to have some proactive little sessions with the lead on the dog, and this will allow you to scrub off the vast majority of that behaviour. In the beginning, just have maybe 20-30 second sessions, so that you are not overloading your dog, but that you've got your dog on the lead here. You're asking, you could be on the sofa, you're asking him to sit and to stay. Once you're aware that he's clocked what's going on the TV, you can feed him. Good boy, tell him to stay. If he tries to scrabble towards the TV, stop him, just calmly bring him back to your feet, and then once he's calm, you can reward him again. What comes to mind is a little dog I saw possibly about this time last year, and it was running up to the TV when Animals and Dogs came on the TV. But it was a little dog, and what we were actually able to do is, because I was able to establish that the dog had this nice little elevated wooden box that he would rest in the evening, that we just tied the dog on a regular dog lead onto the back side of the sofa. And so that every time the dog attempted to rush at the TV, well, he was stopped quite promptly due to his lead, and then the owner was sitting there and able to say, come on your bed, sit, stay, and that there was just this sort of redirecting of the dog's behaviour, and we just gradually scrubbed it out. And over time, actually on my return visit about 6 weeks later, they were very pleased, and the dog was all but cured actually with that behaviour. So you'll need to be realistic about how you go about addressing that behaviour. So you will need to stop the dashing at the TV. You will need to place a big emphasis on rewarding the behaviour you do want. Maybe in the last 60 seconds I could talk about how there's this idea in the public that all we have to do is to ignore the behaviours we don't want. Well, when you get into the realms of behaviour problems, that doesn't apply, or at least in my experience it's not very effective. So ignoring what we don't want is not, in my experience, a good way to address an unwanted problem. We need to address the problem directly, but in a balanced way, placing an emphasis upon rewarding behaviour we do want, and of course looking at some then balanced ways of handling the dog, managing the dog when he or she is doing something we don't want them to do. So in these last few moments, I would just take a further moment to say thank you all once again for joining me, not just on this Petplan live Q&A, but on all of the Q&As we've had so far this year. We also did a good number of puppy Q&As, which were a pleasure to do. And I wish you all, if it's not too early, a Merry Christmas. I look forward to seeing you in 2019. If finally you could also like and share this post, we would be very grateful. So have a good break when it comes around. I know I will be taking a couple of weeks at home, which is always a nice break over Christmas. We are personally taking on a puppy not long before Christmas. It's a coincidence, folks. It's not a Christmas present. So you are very likely to see me this time next year holding a little bundle about this big. Not up there, about here. Okay, so all will be revealed. But thank you again for tuning in, and enjoy your Sunday evening. Thank you.